Dani Olmo was injured yesterday during Barcelona's win, so let's break down what happened. As of now, I haven't seen an official report from Barcelona, but several sites are reporting that he dislocated his shoulder and will be out for 3 weeks, and that's a little strange. A dislocation is defined as a bone coming out of its joint socket. In other words, the bone is not in its proper place. Our shoulder joint is made up of 3 bones. The humerus, which is our arm bone that fits into a socket in the shoulder blade called the scapula, and in the front we have the clavicle, the collarbone. Now, even though the shoulder joint is made of 3 bones, when we talk about a dislocation, we're usually referring to the humerus coming out of the scapula. Out of all the dislocations in our body, the shoulder is the joint that gets dislocated most often. It actually accounts for 50% of all dislocations. By the way, this happens because the humerus sits in a relatively shallow socket within the scapula, which allows for a lot of movement but less stability. Shoulder dislocations usually happen because of the arm being pulled, overextended, or from a fall, which is what happened to Olmo right after he took the shot. The vast majority of dislocations, about 95% of them, are anterior dislocations. That means the arm bone pops out toward the front of the scapula. The biggest problem with dislocations, aside from the immense pain they cause, is the collateral damage that occurs when the shoulder pops out of place. The shoulder capsule, ligaments, cartilage, nerves, or even fractures. 50% of dislocations are accompanied by additional injuries. But beyond the damage to the surrounding tissues, 20% of athletes will dislocate that shoulder again. This can be due to weakness or because of laxity in the ligaments that stabilize the shoulder. The length of the recovery depends on the severity of the injuries and the symptoms, and it's usually 2 to 3 months. That's why this report of 3 weeks is so strange. But I have 2 reasons why I think 3 weeks might actually be a realistic time frame for Olmo to get back on the pitch. The first is that he didn't actually dislocate his shoulder, but rather his AC joint, the acromioclavicular joint, which is located right up here in the front. This makes a lot of sense because he's dislocated that joint in the past, but it doesn't make sense because of where he's holding his shoulder. That's why I don't think it's that, which brings me to the second reason, and that is that Olmo didn't have a full dislocation, but rather a subluxation. In other words, a partial dislocation where the joint pops out and then quickly goes back in. This seems much more likely, especially because it's a bit hard to see, but it looks like his shoulder is in place and it doesn't seem like they put it back in on the field. So it's very likely that during that fall with an outstretched arm, Olmo had a subluxation and it immediately went back into place. A shoulder dislocation is a relatively rare injury in soccer, accounting for only 2% of all injuries in the sport. So, shoulder dislocation or subluxation doesn't mean the season is over, and it's very likely we'll see him back within 3 weeks. Good luck.